Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Hello again. Welcome to episode number 54 of the Near Memo with David, Mike, and me, Greg Sterling, to talk about the developments of the week in search, social, and commerce, and with a local hint of local or whatever.
Local accent?
Yeah, with a local accent is better. We're not going to talk about Ukraine today, although that's very much on most people's minds and it's horrific. But we're going to take a break from that this week, even though we're thinking about it. And for my item this week, I'm going to lead off with the BrightLocal study that was released at the end of January, their annual consumer review study survey, which asks a lot of questions about how often do you read reviews and how many stars do you need before you'll consider a business and what motivates you to write reviews and the balance between positive and negative reviews and what creates credibility and where do you read reviews. But so it's interesting. I linked to it in Friday's newsletter. But the thing that caught my eye was a kind of a paradox between increased reliance on reviews. What they found was that I'll have to look at the particular number. They found, something like 77% of consumers now always or regularly read local reviews, which is up from 60% in 2020. So it's a meaningful increase. And the number of people who never read reviews was down to 2% from 13% in 2020. So people, more and more people are reading reviews. But the other thing that was striking in the opposite direction is that 62% of consumers said they had encountered a fake review at some point in the past year. But more significantly, the survey found that 67% of respondents said having seen a fake review, it made them more distrustful of online reviews in general. So we've got a situation where people are more reliant on reviews, using reviews, engaged with reviews more often, but also seemingly more distrustful of reviews. And just one more, before you guys jump in, one more comment. The survey asked them where were the fake reviews distributed according to their perception. And people in sort of the rank order, Amazon, Google, and Facebook, and then Yelp, TripAdvisor, Apple Maps. So the top three, Amazon, Google, and Facebook, were where most people thought they'd seen fake reviews, which is not necessarily in accord with what's actually going on, although there's a lot of fake reviews on Amazon. But the other thing that was interesting was that people, the question sought to get more insight into how suspicious people were. So even though Facebook was number 3 in terms of the places where people had seen fake reviews, 70%, it was number 1 in terms of people being suspicious about the reviews on Facebook. So in other words, most people were more suspicious of reviews on Facebook than they were Amazon or Google, if that makes sense. Even though they had seen fake reviews less often, according to the survey, they were more suspicious. And I think this reflects just the bad reputation that Facebook has now. Facebook does a bunch of shady stuff. They've had a bunch of scandals. And so people are inclined to believe that there's going to be more bad behavior there. And so they're translating that into sort of a perception of reviews, which I think is where a lot of the data in the survey come from, is perception, not based on actual experience. In the overall transparency company survey, Google was the place where there were the most fake reviews, then Yelp, then TripAdvisor, and Facebook was the lowest of the 4 that were measured. We didn't look at Amazon for different reasons. So I just find all of that kind of interesting and reflective of a larger trend where people are compelled, for whatever reason, to use online tools and services, but they trust them less and less. So any thoughts or comments on that?
Well, my first thought is just a couple of weeks ago, Google published an article about what a great job they're doing with moderation. So either they're delusional or they believe their own PR, or it is what it is, and they're not going to do anything about it. I mean, in the end, they have a very large responsibility in this whole thing, and they have, from my point of view, never done much to sustain the integrity of reviews. And I think that if that continues, it will lead to ultimately, perhaps 5 years out, a decline in the value of and usefulness of reviews. That being said, I think users are also getting smarter in how they use reviews. Like, I was, again, looking at an exercise bicycle. I looked at several that were recommended in Consumer Reports. Peloton, which I counted out because of the price, although now I'm counting out because of quality control issues. But then there was two others. There was a Schwinn and a Sol. And the Schwinn became obvious just looking at the negative reviews that there was physical problems that they didn't fix quickly. And so, again, so I didn't really care about the overall thing other than what consumers said, reports said, but I did care about the fact that there were specific issues that the company didn't deal with correctly. And those persisted. It wasn't like 2 years ago and they went away. Whereas with the Sol, that didn't happen. The complaints that they had were with the quality of the customer service, not with anything about the product. So I think that to some extent, a place like Amazon, it doesn't matter if you're looking mostly at negative reviews for specific details, whether the positive reviews are fake or not. And I don't know on Google whether that's the case.
Greg's dog is clearly very animated by
yes,
the topic.
well, she was recently in the market for an exercise bike herself, and was frustrated by the lack of consensus around recommendations online.
Yes, Mike, I think you brought up a pretty interesting point that Greg has made in the past. You sort of made it obliquely. You said, "Oh, you started with Consumer Reports, and then you sort of went down your consumer journey from there." And Greg has mentioned sites like the Wirecutter previously. CNET doing reviews of electronics has been around for a long time, that sort of thing. And what it seems to me, Greg, I sort of buy into your sort of dilution of the overall impact of reviews as they become more spam filled. That I think consumers will start to move towards these more long form, independent published reviews from reputable sources as their potentially everything from starting point to end point in their journey. And so I still think they're going to be discovered via Google. I don't think that Google's place in the consumer journey is necessarily at risk, but as the reviews in the local pack become less and less and less trustworthy, you might see some of these longer form sites, not Yelp, but I mean, people who review things professionally gaining a little bit more traction. And I think looking at my own behavior, I can sort of sense a similar thing that I sort of expect every restaurant to have at least 4 stars, which is probably what the BrightLocal survey.
Yeah, that's the threshold.
Sort of
that's
default.
the threshold to be considered.
Yeah, so I expect a certain level of quality product in local reviews, but then I'm much more likely to dive into, okay, what does the Willamette Week say? Or maybe there's an article that got published on Eater about top 38 restaurants or the new restaurants or whatever. And that's just in restaurants. It's also true in so many other areas that I find myself searching in: travel, home furnishings, that sort of thing. I've sort of seen myself using blogs and other review sources that have independent credibility much more in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years. So I think that may be the logical outcome of this, is that, those gold stars are sort of necessary table stakes to gain consideration, potentially, but that you're sort of using that as a checkpoint, not as okay, this is going to determine the decision of where I make my purchase.
I think that's absolutely true. Another thing that consumers do that we discovered from surveys at Uberall when I was there is that people increasingly look to multiple sites for consensus. I mean, I've done that in travel. It's like you look at one site, then you go to other sites to see if the statements and ratings are consistent. Even though fake reviews can be duplicated across sites, or people that are faking reviews on one site may fake them on another site. But I think that the whole process of looking for using reviews has become much more complicated and burdensome, for people. And I do think the expert reviews will play a much larger role in certain categories.
It also depends on the technique you use depends on how serious the question is. I mean, if you're buying a spatula,
yes, consideration is a big issue. Yeah,
right. You're going to just take whatever Cooks. You're going to probably take whatever Cooks Illustrated said and just buy that one, right? If you're buying like an exercise bike, it might require more research. But then there may be things that you want to become an expert in yourself, and those in which you make different decisions. So it depends a lot on and a doctor might be an altogether different thing. Although around here, you can't really pick.
Yeah, I mean, I sense that there's some sort of opportunity for somebody in all of this, but I don't know exactly what that would look like from a consumer standpoint, because I think it's just, very difficult to launch a new consumer site that has any kind of review or review aggregation. But I feel like there is some successor to the current review paradigm that we need. I don't know exactly what that looks like.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.